Be careful running, the sun is setting.
Bring him here, he is hungry.
Look how high I can jump.
Imagine a man with 22 wives and over 100 children. A man who could turn himself into a woman or a dog, walk through walls, and spy on his own enemies. This wasn't just magic, it was something much darker. They say his dead mother's ashes gave him powers so terrifying that even his own grandfather was scared of him. They called him Gor Mahia, and today, his name still makes grown men in stadiums chant like they are summoning a demon. This is not fiction. This is the real Luo legend that Kenya's biggest football club was built on. Stick around, because what he did with those powers will absolutely shock you. To understand the legend, we have to go back to the late 1700s in Sigama village, located in Homa Bay. This is where a boy named Gor Obunga was born into a world already thick with tension and ancient secrets. His father, Ogada, was a man of many wives, but Gor's mother, Atoka, died young, leaving Gor as her only child. Imagine growing up in a massive homestead full of half-siblings and dozens of stepmothers, all fighting for power, resources, and their husband's favor. Little Gor was the ultimate outsider, the one everyone watched with a mix of pity and suspicion. But while the other children played, Gor was being shaped by someone much more formidable. His grandfather, Ogalo, was a legendary sorcerer whose name was whispered in fear across the land. In a house full of wives already fighting for dominance, little Gor was about to become the most dangerous one of them all, because his grandfather was preparing a path for him that no one else dared to follow. At the age of 5, the time came for a ritual that would change the course of Luo history forever. In the heart of Sigama village, a grand blessing ceremony was called by Gor's grandfather, the feared sorcerer Ogalo. It was a massive event, a public display of family power where a bull was slaughtered to feed the many descendants of the clan. One by one, the grandchildren were called forward to receive their share of the meat and the life-giving blood of the sacrifice. This was the traditional way of passing on strength and blessing to the next generation. But when it was little Gor's turn to step into the center of the compound, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy and the festive chatter died down into an uneasy silence. Instead of a prime cut of meat or a drink of blood, his grandfather reached into the shadows of his hut and brought out something that made the onlookers gasp in horror. It was a small container filled with the grey, cold ashes of Gor's deceased mother, Atoka. With hands that trembled with an ancient knowledge, Ogalo handed the ashes to the 5-year-old boy and gave him a command that sounded more like a curse than a gift. He told the boy to take these ashes and bury them deep within the floor of his mother's former hut, sealing her spirit and her power within him. Even Ogalo himself, a man who had mastered the dark arts for decades, didn't fully understand the magnitude of what he had just initiated. As Gor walked away with the remains of his mother, the other wives of the compound began to whisper in hushed, terrified voices. They looked at the boy and saw something that wasn't quite right. They saw a child who was no longer just a human, but a vessel for something far older and more powerful. That single handful of ashes turned a 5-year-old into a bridge between the spirit world and our own. The miracles and terrors that followed would soon prove that Gor was no longer a normal boy. From that day on, the people of Kanyamwa began to talk about him in voices that never rose above a whisper, because the boy who buried his mother's ashes was becoming something they couldn't begin to explain. As Gor Mahia grew, his legend moved from whispers in a single village to stories that terrified and fascinated entire tribes across East Africa. He wasn't just a leader, he was a master of the impossible who treated the laws of physics like mere suggestions. Imagine standing guard at your gate, only for a woman you've never seen to walk past you unnoticed, or a stray dog to linger near your secret meeting hut. Little did anyone know that was Gor.
He possessed the terrifying ability to disappear into thin air, pass through solid walls as if they were made of mist, and shapeshift at will into any form he chose. The most scandalous of his tricks involved transforming into a woman to infiltrate enemy camps and eavesdrop on their most private conversations. While other men were sharpening spears and planning raids in the physical world, Gor was playing four-dimensional chess with black magic, gathering every secret his rivals tried to hide. Think about the sheer drama of that era. A man showing up as someone's new wife just to gather intelligence. The man was a psychological warfare genius who used his supernatural gifts to stay 10 steps ahead of everyone else.
But he wasn't just a spy or a sorcerer. He was also a master herbalist and a deeply respected healer. This dual nature, the terrifying shapeshifter and the benevolent doctor, made him a figure of absolute, unquestioned authority. His most famous moments of foresight, however, came during a meeting with the Karango warriors. Gor stood before them and delivered a prophecy that sounded like pure madness at the time. He spoke of a vision involving baby-like creatures who would soon arrive, swarming over the land like a plague of locusts. He described them carrying strange hollow sticks that could spit fire from a distance. He was, of course, talking about the arrival of white colonizers and their rifles, long before they ever set foot in the region. He warned his people sternly not to engage them in traditional combat, for their fire sticks were a power that spears and shields could never hope to match. It was a prophecy that likely saved thousands of lives, proving that his magic wasn't just a way to flex his ego. It was a vital tool for the survival of the Luo people. And yet, even as he navigated the coming of a new world, Gor was busy building a legendary life of his own. By this time, he had already begun the massive task of collecting his 22 wives, creating a homestead so vast and complex that it required every bit of his magic just to keep the peace.
Welcome to the most scandalous chapter of the Gor Mahia legend. We aren't just talking about a local chief. We are talking about a man who managed a household of 22 wives and sired over 100 children. In the late 1800s, a homestead of this size wasn't just a home. It was a small village, a mini kingdom built on complex bloodlines and, in Gor's case, a heavy dose of the supernatural. Today, it is estimated that over 3,000 of his descendants are walking the earth, carrying the DNA of a man who was part human and part spirit. But take a second to really picture the daily life in that compound. Imagine the drama, the whispers, and the intense rivalry that comes when 22 women are all vying for the attention and resources of one single man. This is where Gor's shape-shifting powers moved from the battlefield and into the living quarters. You see, Gor didn't just use his magic to fight wars. He used it to maintain absolute order at home. There is a famous story that when tensions rose among his wives, or when gossip started to brew, a new girl would suddenly appear in the compound. She would sit with the co-wives, listen to their secret complaints, and learn exactly who was plotting against whom. Only later, when he confronted them with their own private words, would they realize that the mysterious visitor was actually Gor himself, shape-shifting into a woman to eavesdrop on his own family. You think your household drama is intense? Imagine finding out your husband was the very person you were just gossiping with by the cooking fire. This wasn't just for amusement. It was cold, calculated survival. In a world of jealous rivals and enemy clans, Gor used this palace intrigue to outmaneuver anyone who dared to challenge his authority. He wasn't just born into leadership. He seized the title of Ruoth, or Chief of Kanyamwa, through a masterful combination of brilliant political strategy and pure, unadulterated sorcery. Nobody dared to cross him because the consequences were unpredictable and terrifying. Legend has it that if you offended him, he wouldn't just argue with you like a normal man. He might turn into a dog, bite you in the dead of night, and vanish before the sun came up, leaving you with a wound that no medicine could heal. He was a man who could literally be anyone and anywhere at once. But even with all this power, Gono knew that a true king needs allies beyond his own borders. To solidify his reign and protect his massive family, he was about to forge a bond with a man from a rival tribe that would shock the entire region. At the height of his influence, Gor Mahia wasn't just a local legend, he was a regional powerhouse whose reputation crossed tribal boundaries that were usually defined by war. One of the most fascinating chapters of his life was his unexpected and deep friendship with the great Maasai spiritual leader, Laibon Lenana. In a time when the Luo and the Maasai were often at odds over land and cattle, these two men recognized something in each other that transcended tribal politics. They were both masters of the unseen world, and their alliance was less like a diplomatic treaty and more like two of East Africa's most feared mystics, swapping secrets like gangsters swapping guns. Legend says they exchanged powerful mystical gifts, Lenana giving Gor secrets of the plains, and Gor sharing the deep water and earth magic of the lake region. This cross-cultural exchange of power made Gor even more formidable in battle and leadership. He didn't just lead with a spear, he led with an aura of invincibility that made enemies surrender before a single drop of blood was shed. He used his shape-shifting and prophetic gifts to guide his people through some of the most turbulent years of the 19th century, maintaining his grip on power well into an age that seemed impossible for a human being. Some stories claim he lived to the legendary age of 126, outlasting his rivals, many of his children, and even the very era he was born into. He became a living monument, a man who had seen the world change from ancient tribal rituals to the dawn of a new colonial reality. By the time he reached his final days, Gor Mahia wasn't just a chief anymore. He had become a semi-divine figure, a bridge between the ancestors and the living, whose shadow would loom over Kenya for centuries to come. But every mortal journey must come to an end, even for a man who seemed to defy death itself. Gor Mahia eventually passed away and was buried right back where it all began, in his ancestral home of Sigama. However, if you think his story ended when he was put into the ground, you don't understand the power of true Luo magic. Today, his grave isn't just a quiet historical site. It is a highly active, heavily guarded spiritual epicenter. People from all walks of life, famous herbalists, wealthy businessmen, and top-tier politicians make secret pilgrimages to this exact spot, seeking just a fraction of the power he once commanded. But visiting the resting place of Kenya's greatest sorcerer comes with a chilling set of rules. You cannot just walk up to his shrine. There is a strict, terrifying warning passed down through the generations. If you touch the leaves, move a single stone, or take even a handful of dirt from his compound without the explicit permission of his direct descendants, you will fall mysteriously ill, or worse, you will die. The locals firmly believe that his spirit is still awake, still watching, and still protecting his territory with the same fierce energy he had in life. The man who could walk through walls hasn't really left. Even in death, Gor Mahia is still collecting his dues. Disturb his resting place and he will absolutely disturb your life. Fast forward to 1968, when two football clubs in Kenya merged to form an unstoppable force. They needed a name that would strike immediate fear into their opponents. They didn't pick just any name. They chose Gor Mahia. They did this so that every time their legendary fans, the Green Army, fill the stadium and chant, "Gor, Gor, Gor," they are literally summoning the spirit of the sorcerer who could turn into a dog and destroy his enemies. It is a psychological weapon disguised as a football chant. That is exactly why Kogalo, the house of Ogalo, never truly dies.
Drop a comment and tell me which part shocked you most, the 22 wives or the ritual with his mother's ashes. Type Mahia if you want a part 2 on his descendants today. Subscribe and hit the bell. Next week, we're exposing another Kenyan legend.